Welcome to the Happier Life Project, the official podcast from the award-winning mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self. Hosted by broadcaster and journalist Gabby Sanderson.
Welcome back, friends. I'm your host, Gabby, and today we're shining a light on a condition that affects over 1 billion people worldwide, yet is still so misunderstood, minimised, or dismissed. Migraine. For many of us, headaches are just part of life. We casually say things like, "Oh, I get tension headaches," or "It's just a bad headache," without thinking twice. But as we'll discover in this episode, many people who believe they're struggling with reoccurring headaches, which can be really, really painful, are actually living with migraine, often without realising it. In fact, that revelation even happens to me during this conversation with today's guest. Because migraine isn't just a bad headache. It's a complex neurological disorder that can affect every aspect of our lives, from work and relationships to our emotional well-being and mental health. Joining us to help unpack all of this is Dr Katy Munro, Senior Headache Specialist at the National Migraine Centre, a UK charity dedicated to supporting people with migraine through expert consultations and education. After many years working as an NHS GP, Dr Munro became one of the leading voices in migraine awareness. She's author of the book Managing Your Migraine from the Penguin Life Expert series. Katy co-founded and hosts the Heads Up podcast, which is in its 6th year and is absolutely fantastic. And she has migraine herself, giving her a unique perspective on both the science and the lived experience of this condition. In this episode, we'll start by exploring what headaches and migraine really are and how they differ. We'll then dive into the connection between migraine and mental health, which is huge, and discuss the impact migraine can have on daily life. Dr. Katy also breaks down how to distinguish between different headache types. I ask her about triggers and lifestyle factors, including the influence of things like diet and alcohol. And we also talk about the stigma that surrounds headaches, how they're too often trivialised, and why understanding what's really going on in your head can make such a big difference. So if you or someone you love experiences headaches or migraine, stay tuned. This conversation might just change the way you think about them forever. Ready to find a healthier, happier you? Let's get started. Welcome, Dr. Katy Munro, to the Happier Life Project podcast. I cannot believe that we've been going for so long and not covered headaches, migraines, and the correlation between mental health and well-being. Because now I've researched you and the subject matter, I'm like, this is huge. How have we missed this?
Oh, yeah. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm always delighted to speak about headaches and migraine because having been there myself and suffered, I realise what a great need there is for people to get good information. And I think one of the reasons it doesn't come up too often is because of the stigma around headaches and migraine. People often feel that they're a bit of a burden or a bit ashamed or they just don't count it. So we need to make changes. We need to bring it to people's attention, especially because we have more that we can do these days for it.
Yeah, well, they've been trivialized as well. And I think probably mostly by people that don't suffer from them themselves, you know. But yeah, we'll definitely get into it. But I do feel like I've hit the jackpot with you. I mean, when I was looking for a guest to talk about headaches and migraines and mental health, then I found you, and I'd already reached out to you and you'd agreed to come on the podcast. And then I started reading a bit about your background. 24 years in the NHS general practice. You were the lead for mental health issues in your specific practice and had a special interest in chronic pain conditions in bereavement. And I was like, there's no better person to be speaking to. Can I just ask from the get-go for a bit of clarification between when we're talking about headaches and migraine? And we don't say migraines, right? We say, oh, she's smiling.
Oh, you're already on board with that. I'm so pleased. Yeah, I'm trying really hard to get people to think about using the word migraine for the disorder.
Okay.
Migraine, the disorder, causes and brings a multitude of symptoms, including headache, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, weakness of the limbs, sometimes tingling, sometimes abdominal pain, so a multitude of symptoms. Headache is one of the symptoms of migraine, the disorder. So I talk about migraine attacks. Because if you talk about what's the difference between a headache and a migraine, people just kind of go, oh, well, a headache's a milder one and a migraine is a more severe one. But actually, migraine attacks can be anything from mild to moderate to severe. And of course, headache is a symptom, but it could be a symptom of other things. So it could be a symptom of infection or a bang on the head or a tumor or various other things. So headache is a symptom. One of the things that headache is a symptom of is migraine, the disorder. So I get asked that question all the time. So I'm part of the Lose the S campaign. So whenever I see migraines, I cross out the S and put migraine attacks.
Okay. Thank you. That is so valuable to know. And I'm thinking about not just myself, but so many other people that probably have misdiagnosed, you know, because if you say I've got a really bad headache, it doesn't land as much as say I've got a migraine. And I think people are like, oh, okay. And they understand. And sometimes you can be crippled, you know, when you talk about the level of a migraine being like mild to severe. I think that can apply to headaches as well, can't it? It can be something that's like a mildish and then something that's like more debilitating, let's say.
Yeah, but if you think about headache as a symptom, it's not a diagnosis. So you would never use the terminology. So sometimes people say to me, oh, I just get the normal headaches that everybody gets. Now, that is never a thing that you would say about a rash or a cough, because you know that a rash or a cough is a symptom of something going on. You go and find out, why have I got a rash? So if you're having headaches, that's not the end of the story. You need to find out why you're having headaches. And the most common cause in my experience is migraine. But you might be getting headaches because you've got inflammation of your temporal artery, or you've got raised pressure in your head, but those are much rarer conditions. So vastly, the majority of people who go and see their GP and say, I'm getting headaches, most of them will have migraine. Whether it's diagnosed or not is another question. But it's really, there's a lot of stigma, myths and misunderstandings about migraine, which is why I always say yes if people say, would you like to talk about it? I'm like, yes, yep, whatever I can do to clarify things.
Yeah, so if you're like, this is just getting too much and you go to the doctor because of the main symptom you said is the headache, then that's when chances are it's probably that you are a migraine sufferer.
Yes. You can ask yourself 3 questions. So it's a very quick, validated questions that people have researched into. Does this help identify whether it's migraine? So one is, in the last 3 months, have you had a headache that has disrupted your activities of daily living? Have you had nausea or vomiting as part of that scenario? And have you had any sensitivity to light? And if you answer yes to 2 or 3 of those questions, then you probably have migraine. So if you go to the doctor and say, I have a headache, but I don't have any other symptoms, and that's very unusual actually, because most people with migraine will also have at least one or two other symptoms as part of their migraine attack. And so it can really help to clarify, because if you don't know what the diagnosis of the headache is, how can you get good information on how to treat and manage it? So I'm really passionate about raising awareness that, it's very likely if you go to your GP with headache, that you are suffering from migraine. And GPs need to get on board with reducing the fear of missing a brain tumor. So most healthcare professionals are really, really scared about missing a brain tumor. But brain tumors are very rare, and they usually come with other signs and symptoms. On physical examination, if we examine somebody, there's normally something we can find. Where with migraine, we don't. There aren't any physical signs. There aren't any tests. So it's all done on the history, really.
And can they come on at any age?
Absolutely, yeah. So my youngest patient started having migraine attacks when he was 3, and I saw him when he was 5. He had a strong family history. It is a genetic condition, we know that, runs in families, although not everybody in the family will necessarily get migraine attacks, and not everybody in the family who has migraine will necessarily know that they have migraine, because they may have just thought it was the normal headaches that they quote everybody gets. Not everybody gets headaches, so I always scotch that one. We rarely see people with new onset headache after the age of 50. So if you've never had any sort of migraine attacks before the age of 50 and you start getting headaches, then that's what we call a red flag. And I would say those are the people that I would be slightly more concerned about. They need to get into their GP, and they need to probably have more investigations to make sure that it's not something else. So it doesn't normally start after the age of 50, but it can continue up until, the later years. Usually, thank goodness, it does improve as people get through into their 60s and 70s, but not always.
Going back to, I guess, the theme of the episode, I'm sure these stats that I'm going to share you are well aware of. In fact, I even got some from your podcast, which we'll talk about as well. But I just think this is more for the benefit. Well, first of all, I want to get your kind of feedback on them, but also for the benefit of our listeners, because I think they drive home the message with this correlation between mental health and migraine. I'm saying mental health and migraine now because I don't think headaches is, I think we can slash that one off.
Yes.
So this is some key statistics from a survey conducted by the Migraine Trust. It was published just over a year ago. They studied 2,028 people living with migraine. 89% said their mental health had been affected. 55% said the impact was significant. 34% had thoughts of suicide because of their migraine. 80% said they participated less in social occasions. 59% had lost confidence. 48% felt isolated. 49% said migraine negatively affects their ability to work. 27% said it caused significant financial difficulties. And 90% of people believe that, like you've used the phrase a couple of times now, that most people think a migraine is just a bad headache, or just, just a headache. And just turning quickly to the USA, this study was released 3 years ago to investigate the link between migraine and mental health. The American Migraine Foundation, with support from Biohaven Pharmaceuticals, distributed the Migraine and Mental Health Connection Survey. So 1,100 respondents with migraine who also identify as having a mental health condition, and 302 healthcare providers participated in the survey. So in this survey, patients with migraine reported being diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, almost 60%, 50% with depression, PTSD was 25%. Furthermore, 87% of participants with migraine and 94% of healthcare providers expressed they believe mental health would greatly improve with better migraine control. So I guess kind of like what comes first, the chicken or the egg here?
Yeah.
The mental health.
It's quite shocking, isn't it? It's shocking when you hear all those statistics and you realise the huge impact of migraine. So we know that people with migraine have much higher mental health issues, and people with anxiety is certainly very common. And the anxiety can be anticipation of things. So people start to close down their lives because they're worried that they're going to have a migraine attack. So they might not make arrangements to go and see friends. They might not apply for promotion at work. They might decide that they won't go on that holiday because they've always, had a migraine attack when they land somewhere and they, laid out for 2 or 3 days. So the anxiety is very, very common. It's also, if you have severe migraine attacks, it's really debilitating, so people may be lying if they haven't had good medication advice or good management advice, they may be lying in a dark room for 2, 3, 4 days, not able to move. And that in itself is depressing. That gives any chronic pain condition can give you more depression, anxiety, I think. So which comes first? Well, it's interesting because there is a sort of what we call a bidirectional relationship. So if people have depression or anxiety and they also have migraine, they're probably likely to have worse migraine attacks. So the impact may be worse because they are feeling low. And we know that the brain is kind of a bag of neurochemicals, and it's not segmented into little areas. This is the mental health bit and this is the pain bit. It's all overlapping. And so I think when I'm talking to people about managing their migraine, we're also talking about managing their mental health, managing their general fitness, managing their sleep quality, managing all those kind of holistic things that can improve a person's health. And that in itself tends to improve migraine attacks. The other interesting thing, some of the new medications that we've got, so there are neurochemicals called CGRP, calcitonin gene-related peptide. We don't need to remember the long name. So CGRP is one of the crucial neurochemicals in triggering migraine attacks in some people. And by blocking that with newer medications, we've found that people can be hugely helped. But also, interestingly, as their migraine attacks improve, often their depression lifts as well. And so do we treat the depression or do we treat migraine? I think the answer is both. Right. We need to try and think about both. And you can't just think about migraine in isolation. It just overlaps with so many other conditions. And mental health is a really key part of that.
Oh, I actually should include your study from the National Migraine Centre that you're a part of. This study was conducted, well, you shared the results in, I think it was the first season series of the podcast. So this is probably 5 or 6 years ago that you did this survey. And this was with nearly 2,000 respondents. 50% of people suffered from loneliness. So isolation is, again, another big factor. I mean, and you don't actually have to suffer from migraine to suffer from loneliness anyway. But like, if the two are connected, then it's even worse, isn't it, really?
Yeah. I think the other factor is that the impact of migraine isn't just on the person themselves. It ripples out to their family, to their friends, to their work colleagues, and further and further. And so by helping somebody manage their migraine better, we also improve the lives of their family, their social life, their work prospects, and all of that. So I think people get very despondent when those who are close to them don't understand, oh, haven't you sorted those headaches out? Or, oh, she's off again with a migraine. We hear this, people sort of say, make this assumption that if you say you've got a migraine attack and you can't come into work, that you're swinging the lead, they're just faking it. But actually, more often, people with migraine tend to be going into work when they shouldn't be because they don't want to let people down. So we sometimes call them migraine warriors because they're more commonly faking being well than faking being ill. People go in and work when they're in the middle of a migraine attack or at the end of a migraine attack when they're not quite back to normal because they don't want to miss work.
Yeah.
But they may not be back to 100% of fully functioning. So I think that's also something that people need to be aware of. And if employers or schools with young people, if they can be understanding about migraine and how a migraine attack can impact somebody, not just on the day of the bad headache, but from the first changes that are happening in the brain to the final part of the migraine attack. It may last for up to 5 days. So that is, that's a serious impact on a person's life for that extent of time.
Yeah. And if you imagine if you're going to work and you work in an office and, you've got to stare at a screen and you've got the sensory overload with the lights. Oh my God, that must just be horrendous. So then what if somebody's got a really bad headache, or you hear about like cluster headaches? Would they be entitled to the same kind of relief, I suppose, and compassion?
Absolutely. So cluster headache is a completely different headache disorder from migraine. So we divide headaches into primary and secondary. Primary is like migraine and cluster headache, and there are some other rarer primary headaches. Secondary headaches are headaches that are caused by an underlying condition, as I was mentioning before, like a tumor or an infection or something. So cluster headache is much rarer than migraine. Migraine occurs in about 1 in 7 people. Cluster headache in about 1 in 1,000 people. Much rarer. Okay. Very different scenario, but often, unfortunately, it takes a while for people to be diagnosed because everyone assumes it's migraine, it's a bad headache. So it's just, cluster headache occurs on one side of the head, always, and it's associated with watery eye, stuffy nose, and severe, excruciating, sudden onset of pain that lasts up to 3 hours. And it's often around the spring and autumn equinoxes. And it used to be called the alarm clock headache because it wakes people in the night recurrently. And it's also sometimes known as the suicide headache. So cluster headache is something that I also like to talk about because I think more people need to understand. But the way that we treat cluster headache is quite different from the way that we treat migraine. Migraine medications are often tried for people with cluster headache, but they may not work. But again, the understanding of cluster headache by employers or friends and family is really, really crucial because, it is one of the most severe pains that you can experience. And unfortunately, because it's much rarer, it is more commonly misunderstood, I think.
Right. Wow. God, I'm learning so much today. Thank you. Just speaking on behalf of myself, never mind everybody else.
Yeah. So sometimes people come to me and they say, somebody's told me that I have cluster migraine. And I stop them there and say, there's no such thing as cluster migraine.
Right.
So there's cluster headache and there's chronic migraine.
Right.
But there's no such thing as cluster migraine. The terminology that we use is actually really important to get it right. Yeah. So if anybody's been told, oh, you've got cluster migraine, you haven't, but you might have cluster headache or you might have chronic migraine, or sadly, sometimes people have both, but we still don't call it cluster migraine.
Well, I'm just going to talk about myself for 1 second just because I'm going to utilise you. Well, no, I'm just curious, and I think it does apply to a lot of people listening, because certainly even within just family members, in my family, we all suffer from tension headaches, particularly driving, particularly working from screens. And for me, it's carrying a very, very heavy laptop plus usually recording equipment on my shoulders, or travelling, because I don't want to pay for a suitcase usually, so I put it all in my backpack and then I'm lugging it around the airport. So what have you got to say on when it's like muscular? Because for me, then pain relief, it barely hits the spot. It doesn't do much. Doing some yoga, going for a massage, does a lot more,
Yeah.
but it can be, for me, crippling.
So tension headache is very commonly overdiagnosed, and very commonly people put their headaches down to tension headache when actually it's migraine. So if you have a tension headache, and I have to say I very rarely diagnose tension headache, I can't remember the last time, it's a featureless headache. It's normally like a band around the head.
Yeah.
It doesn't worsen with movement, doesn't worsen with light, isn't associated with nausea or vomiting. So if you have any of those features with your headache, you're getting migraine attacks. So I'm commonly telling people, you haven't got tension headache, you've got migraine, but you just didn't realize it. So if you, when you have one of those crippling headaches, if you would rather lie down and go in a dark room and not move, that's migraine, that's not tension headache. So if you have lots of members of your family who have those kind of headaches, they probably all have migraine because it is a genetic condition.
But it usually seems to be brought on by like strain, of the shoulders.
Yeah.
Is that a thing with migraine?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's a bidirectional relationship. So migraine pain can be referred down to the neck and shoulders. But if you are straining your neck and shoulders, you can trigger a migraine attack. Sometimes people do exercise in the gym and they say, I got a headache after doing that. And that's usually
I always get that
a migraine.
women.
Yeah, so that's migraine.
I suppose, I guess I think because like I can get over it within a day or two. Oh no, now I'm saying it out loud. I was going to say sometimes 3.
Yeah, but you're saying that medication doesn't work.
Yeah,
with a tension headache, normally with a tension headache, over-the-counter medication like ibuprofen and paracetamol will sort it out. And if you believe, there's quite a number of headache specialists that don't really believe in tension headache. They think it is part of, that's probably a milder migraine attack. So if you think a bit more about it being a migraine attack, get some good migraine medication, you might find that you can get rid of that headache within an hour or 2, and then you'll be back doing whatever you want to do and won't have to waste a day, struggling with the pain.
Wow. Mind blown. Well, so then
get that a lot.
Yeah. So then what are some of the other triggers then of a migraine?
So if you think about the genes for migraine make the brain more sensitive to change, and change is a key word. So change throughout our life in our internal body environment or our external environment, what we think happens is that the brain is set genetically to not process change quite so well. So if a number of things change, then that can cause irritation of the brain that leads to migraine attacks. So if you think about what sort of things could change, in women, hormones, so fluctuating hormone levels throughout the menstrual cycle, crazy hormone fluctuations in the perimenopause. We see a real surge in women experiencing migraine attacks through, from their 40s through to their late 50s. Boys and girls have the same amount of migraine attacks up until puberty, and then girls pull away and start to get more migraine attacks. So hormones are a big one. Eating regularly. If you skip meals, you are much more likely because your blood sugar is changing. It's going up and down because you're leaving long periods of time in between meals. So we always recommend having regular slow release energy foods like the low GI foods, proteins, healthy fats. Changes in sleep pattern. So if you get up every day at 7:30 to go off to work, and then at the weekend you have a lie-in until 12 noon, and this sometimes applies to teenagers, who we make them get up early and go off into school, and then at the weekend they stay in bed for hours. Much more likely, because that's a change in their sleep pattern, much more likely to get a migraine attack after that. Stress hormones increasing can cause a problem with more attacks, but also sometimes stress releasing and reducing. So we sometimes hear people saying, well, I had a really busy week at work and I was fine all through the week. And then by the time the weekend came and I was winding down, then I got a weekend headache. So we think it's changes adding together to irritate the brain that triggers it. And then for some people, it's things like bright lights or strong smells. So some people are very sensitive to perfumes. And, it may be that your work colleague who wears a very heavy perfume actually can lead to you having a migraine attack. So that needs a discussion. And usually friends who are sympathetic will try and avoid perfume. All sorts of things like that can irritate the brain. Sensory things, being over hot, being in a stuffy room, sometimes even weather changes. So falling barometric pressure, rain, thunderstorms, lightning can sometimes make people more prone to having migraine attacks. So it's complex. And everybody needs to kind of find their own individual way of managing the things that aggravate them, because it's different for everybody, really.
I'd forgotten about the eating thing actually with diet, because that is another thing. If I do leave it too long, I'll get a crippling headache. I'm thinking, oh dear. But I totally
Gabby,
forgot about that. Yeah.
You have migraine. I'm really sorry to be the bearer of a diagnosis, but you have migraine.
Okay, thanks. Well, I mean, the good news is that I don't really let myself go too long without eating, so that's not such a big trigger for me. Yeah. But when it does hit, boy, does it hit, Yeah.
So you need to get some rescue medication. So when we're trying to help people with their migraine, first of all, I always start with the lifestyle things: eating, sleep patterns, stress management, exercise, those kind of regular things. Yeah. Then I will talk about the supplements that can be helpful. So magnesium supplements, making sure your vitamin D level is optimized. There's some evidence for vitamin B2, for coenzyme Q10, and for omega-3. So, making sure those kind of things, you've got good information, and you may choose to do one or more of those. And then we start talking about the ways that we can help with the actual attack. And that might be acute rescue treatments to get you back in the room from having that horrible pain, or it might be preventative strategies. And there's just a multitude of things to talk about then. So we can't do that in 2 minutes. We have to have. Sorry. But also, one of the joys of working at the National Migraine Centre is that we can offer a new patient appointment for 40 minutes. We often overrun. I mean, that often takes me an hour to see a new patient, because we will not only take the whole history of what's been happening to that person, but we will also explore all these different treatment options and tailor make some advice for them to then go back to their GP and say, look, this is my plan from the National Migraine Centre. Can we work together to take that forward? And, we hear the words life-changing in clinic very often, because people come back and they say, I just can't believe how much better I am. And it's such a rewarding job to do.
Well, so the good news throughout all of this then is that there are things you can do to reduce / eliminate migraine. I would just going back to diet again. I don't think anybody who has a good diet would say, oh, it triggers a migraine, but I can't help but wonder if somebody that has the traditional bad diet, I think about particularly aspartame actually, because I noticed when I drunk, and it's been many years since I've drunk it now, but like a Diet Coke, then I get really bad headache after drinking that.
Yeah, some people are particularly sensitive to things like aspartame and other additives. And traditionally, people have been told, oh, if you have migraine, you mustn't have cheese, citrus, red wine, all these things, chocolate. But actually, there's a lot less influence of those kind of things on triggering headaches than was previously thought. So I don't ban people from things. There was a study a while ago now that looked at people who had migraine and fed them chocolate and tried to see whether or not the chocolate triggered the migraine attacks. And most of the people, what they found was that it didn't trigger the attacks, but the craving for chocolate was a premonitory symptom, so like a predictive symptom that a migraine attack was coming on. So part of what we know is that the early phase of a migraine attack doesn't involve head pain, but it involves changes like yawning or food cravings, or energy changes. So sometimes people feel really fatigued the day before the pain kicks in. So identifying what was changing, what were those symptoms before that headache started, can be really, really helpful, because then you can take medication early and perhaps avoid having the headache pain at all. But yeah, so chocolate craving is a warning sign that you're getting a migraine attack.
Wow.
So we don't ban people from specific foods. But having said that, there are always certain people who will say to me, but yes, I found that if I exclude this from my diet, then it actually helps. So if you have something that you eat that every single time you eat it, it gives you a migraine attack, like aspartame in the Diet Coke. And I'm not a fan of Diet Coke, I have to say. It's generally of no nutritious value to anybody.
No, but 20 years ago, who knew,
Yeah, who knew? But, obviously, then you avoid that thing. But on the whole, it's about eating regularly, having slow release energy foods, not having peaks and troughs in your blood sugar. And that can be particularly important around people who are exercising. So if you're going to the gym, first thing in the morning, you haven't had any breakfast, you do a lot of exercise, you haven't eaten since the night before, your blood sugar may be quite low by the time you've finished your workout in the gym. And then people say, well, actually, and then going to the gym and having exercise actually triggers a migraine attack. Well, actually, if you eat something, make sure you're hydrated before you go to the gym, you may find that you can actually exercise without getting a headache. So, yeah.
Okay.
Lots
What about
of tricks.
alcohol then?
Oh, well, I always say to people, it's not really my job to enable you to drink more alcohol. So alcohol is very commonly a trigger. People often will say to me, well, I can't drink alcohol because I do find that, later in the evening or the following day, I get a powerful migraine attack. There is a theory that hangovers are actually migraine. I'm not sure that we're 100% sure of that. But if you think about alcohol, first of all, it drops your blood sugar, it dehydrates you, and in itself, it can be an irritant to the brain. So yeah, it's best not to go mad on alcohol.
Well, I rarely drink it because I have like one drink, and first of all, I'm a lightweight and it goes to my head, and second of all, because I get a headache. But I don't feel like I get any other symptoms of what is a migraine. So I guess this is why I've never put the two together.
Yeah, but if you have it triggered by alcohol, it probably is. You have migraine, Gabby. But it's funny, isn't it? Because those three questions that I said to you earlier on, when I was first having headaches badly, I was a GP, I was in my early 40s, never had headaches before. But because I was a busy GP, I never got lunch because GPs don't stop. They work very continuously. But it took me a while to realize, because it wasn't particularly one-sided. It was all over my head. It didn't particularly make me feel sick, and it wasn't particularly light sensitive, but it was often worse around my period, and it was often much worse if I moved. And those are also very key things that we find, that people who are having migraine attacks, they want to stay still. They don't want to move around. They don't want to jump up and down or rush about. They can't always stay still, but they would prefer to. And that's going back to what we were saying about cluster headache. That's one of the crucial differences. People who have cluster headache, they don't want to stay still. They want to pace around, or they get very agitated. They sometimes punch their head or bang their head against the wall because they just want to get away from the pain. Whereas people with migraine just want to creep about, or preferably lie down and stay still.
Wow.
So everybody's different.
I mean, I just feel like I could ask you so many more questions, but I really want to be mindful of your time. And I think now is probably the best time to signpost for how people can check out, well, first of all, your own podcast, which is called Heads Up, which I've not obviously listened to all of the episodes because there's 6 seasons, but I certainly will be going back to it because it's so interesting. And you are a great presenter, and it's so informative. And I'm sure that people listening just to our conversation today will have realised that we are just scratching the surface on this stuff. So I guess it's available in all of the usual podcast places,
Yes.
plus on the
Yeah.
National Migraine Centre website as well, right?
Yes, if you go to the National Migraine Centre website and click on the tab that says Understanding Migraine, there's a drop down there that says Heads Up Podcast, and all of the episodes are there. And I think of it now as a sort of dip in series, a bit like an encyclopedia, if you like.
Yeah.
So I certainly say to people, there's no need to go to the beginning of series 1 and listen to every single episode. Scroll through, look at the titles of the episodes and the blurb, and see which ones are most relevant to you. Because we don't just talk about migraine. There's a couple of episodes about cluster headache. There's an episode about migraine in men, because sometimes men need everything in one episode. I don't want to listen to all the other ones. There's a couple of episodes on women and hormones and migraine, which have been very popular. And there's one on migraine in children and adolescents. So, we've tried to cover every, because there's a lot of information.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons we did the podcast was because we were trying to give out this information every week to our patients in clinic. And so my colleagues and I decided that a podcast was a really nice way of sharing information. And then I got asked to write the book. So
yes, I'm going to talk a bit about the book just quickly on the podcast and the different episodes. It's also worth looking at them to share to friends, because I saw one of your more recent ones is on endometriosis and migraine, and I was thinking about who I could share that with. So even if we're not just talking about for ourselves, I think it's a really good resource because if you don't suffer, guaranteed you'll know a handful of people, because like you said, it's 1 in 7 people globally?
1 in 7. Yeah.
So we can share the help and share the resources that way as well. But going back to the book, it's another great resource if you prefer reading to listening, or maybe if you want to do both, why not?
Yeah, Penguin asked me to write it, and I tried to write it as a kind of easy DIY, manage your own migraine, because I'm really in favor of empowering people with information so they can choose the way forward. It's not just about saying, here's a medication. It's about, right, what can I do to help myself? And I've been on that journey myself. So, I searched around, why am I getting these horrible headaches? First of all, I had to get the diagnosis. Then I had to work out what I could do in my lifestyle to try and improve things, like taking lunch into my general practice, making sure I stopped for lunch, making sure my sleep was better, making sure I was managing my stress. And then coming into the perimenopause, there's been a lot of discussion about perimenopause publicly, lots of campaigners talking about HRT and how we can affect women's health with better understanding of the perimenopause. And I'm always saying, don't forget migraine, because migraine can kick off in the perimenopause because of all the changes of hormone. Perimenopause doesn't cause migraine, but it reveals it sometimes. The other episode I'd just flag up of the podcast is we did one recently on migraine and ADHD. So we see a lot of people with neurodiversity in our clinic as well. There seems to be a strong link with that. And also with people who are hypermobile and have issues with histamine. So there's lots of linked conditions that are quite fascinating actually as well.
Thank you so much for sharing an absolute wealth of information with us today. And sorry to our listeners if I've talked about myself a little bit too much on this episode.
Can I also just say that the National Migraine Centre is a charity. We're not private. We're completely independent from the NHS. But if you are struggling with migraine, or even if you're wondering if you have migraine and you want to speak to a specialist headache doctor, you can refer yourself to us at the National Migraine Centre by going on our website, booking a consultation, and you can either prepay for a slightly speedier consultation, or you can wait and do it on a donation basis. So we do try and keep a good 30% of our patients are on a donation basis so that we can offer a specialist appointment to anybody. And we will give them the time for a full assessment, and then we write a full report, and that goes to the patient to then share with their GP or whoever they feel it might be helpful to share that with. And we have just recruited 7 new doctors. So we are a team of 28 doctors who are all really interested in helping people with headaches and migraine.
That is incredible. Well, we'll add the links to the episode show notes as well, and I'll give our social media girls a heads up to spread the word as well. Dr. Katy, thank you again. Wow, you're just a legend.
Thank you.
Hello friends, it's Gabby back with you. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download. You can access all of the content, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. If you found this episode helpful, please do subscribe and leave a review and share it with your friends. And to find and follow us on social media, we are most active on Instagram, and you can find us at My Possible Self. And I've been at Radio Gabby. Until the next one, do take care. Bye for now.